Hi, class. Welcome to week 2. I'm just going to go through the lecture here so that you can view it. If you want, you could just read it. You don't have to watch this video, but I figured I would at least give you the full experience of being, in person. Okay, so this is the subject we're going to cover, yada, yada, yada. All right, so color design. So one of the things we have to think about there are certain tent poles of graphic design or digital imaging, we should say. One is the topography, one is the layout, and another one is color, right? So it's one of the things we really have to think about, and it can mean a lot. It can make and break a whole composition. To a large extent, it's really what's going to add both the interest and variety inside of your work, as well as one of the main factors in creating a harmonious, unified piece of work. Okay. So when we talk about colors, they have different feelings and stuff. So when we talk about warm colors, your warm colors are generally from the spectrum of yellow to red. They're colors that feel warm, and they have different connotations to them as well, right? So typically when we think things that are yellow, we think of things often that are past, that are happy, right? Makes you think of sun, sunny. Things that are red usually makes you think of something that is passionate, right? Whenever something is red, it's got full of passion. Orange is often caution, right? Green. So when we talk about cool colors, that'll be generally from the spectrum of, like, let's say a cool green to blue, and maybe even like kind of a purple. You can see like purple and green can both kind of be on either end of it, depending on how. You can actually have cool versions of red and yellow, by the way, as well. If you're a painter, you would know this because you can do what is it? Usually it's crimson red and what's the other one? I can't think of it, but it'll be like the two types, right? There's royal black and there's renaissance black. So you can have black that's warm and black that's cool. Anyway, so with our cool colors here, certainly in the spectrum, when we think of certain things, right? So green, green's a weird one because green can both mean sick, but it can also mean like nature. Can also be money. Has some very literal meanings. Blue, typically when people think of blue, they think of calmness, right? Being cold, wisdom. One of the reasons why you'll see royalty is wearing purple. Most people know this is because purple is an expensive color, but the other reason is that when you're purple, you have both the passion, the strength of red, but also the wisdom and coolness of blue. So it's a little bit of both. So that's why purple is good for royalty. People just think, whatever, right? So tints, basically that means adding whites to it. So the most famous tint that you would typically think of is pink, right? So if you add white to red, you can end up with pink. That's just a tint of red. Shades means adding black to it. So, going from red to basically dark red. So these are changing the value. Value is the light to darkness, okay? Pure hue just means that you have added neither white nor black. One of the things that happens as you add white to something is that it actually is becoming grayer, right? Because you're actually removing hue because you're adding something else. So also the same thing happens here. If you look at this, is not as drawing you in as much as this red. This red's much brighter. It ascends. Well, this descends. Same thing here. This might be lighter, but the red actually ascends because it's a stronger hue. So that's what hue is. Tones means just basically adding gray. So it just means you basically you can tone it down, right? You might have heard that term before. It just means not making it as brilliant. Okay. Now the main thing to really think about when you are doing your compositions is to have a color scheme. There are a lot of different color schemes out there. Far more than these. These are just kind of the most common ones. So one color scheme is achromatic. It just means it has no color, right? So you can be empathetic, but if you're apathetic, it means you don't care. Achromatic, without color. So it just means black and white. Black and white will work for most things. In any design you make, you generally want to make sure that it can work in black and white, because if it's being reproduced without color, you'll know that it still functions, particularly if you're doing like a logo design or something like that. However, it is the least interesting of all of the color schemes because there's nothing else in it. But it's 100% cohesive because there's just white and black. Monochromatic is similar to achromatic, but instead of no color, there's one color. So kind of like these things here, these are a monochromatic color scheme because it's all red, but it's different tints and shades. That's what this is, right? So you just have a variety of value, but all within the same color. So these all are basically within an orange and a range therein. Okay. Analogous means that it's the colors that are near each other on the color wheel. Hopefully you are familiar with the color wheel, but the idea here is that I could do from yellow to orange, right? That would be analogous. Or I could do from purple to orange, or I could do like blue to cyan, I don't know, blue-green, aquamarine, right? Or green to this one, or we can go from this green to this color. But basically, it's colors that do shift in hue, but it's not going crazy. Usually from like a secondary to a primary, or a tertiary to a secondary. So primary colors are your red, green, blue, or I'm sorry, your red, yellow, blue. But your secondary colors would be orange, purple, and green. Tertiary would be blue, green, or yellow, green. That's the idea. Okay, so analogous would just be in a spectrum. Most of the time, this is probably where you want to be. Complementary means you use colors that are the opposite of each other, so they will bounce the most. They will have the most pop. You will often see these where you will see sports teams because they're trying to pop, right? Or if it's a fashion brand or something that wants to pop, like a sports drink, something that's really trying to be like, look at me. They will use a complementary color scheme. However, it's naturally kind of too much, right? I mean, this really pops, but it's too much. Warm and cool just means that you try to use colors in generally in the warm area or generally in the cool area. It's kind of like analogous. Some color tips. Try to avoid similar tones. Just meaning like, have some things that are more or less saturated. You don't want things that all be the same because they won't. See how these are kind of competing with each other? It doesn't stand out as well as it could. Saturation, do not overly saturate the colors, right? This hurts my eyes. They are bleeding because this is too much, right? That's way too much. It kind of hurt. I don't want to look at it anymore. Analogous, when you use analogous color schemes, you can actually create things kind of seasonally. So, these are all the same thing, but this kind of denotes, let's say, maybe spring, summer, fall, winter, by using a general analogous color scheme, right? This is kind of in the blues. This is like kind of in the orange. This is actually kind of pretty far, but you get the idea, all right? Avoid cliches. So you might have to like push the tints and shades or even some hues, because if you look at this one, it makes you think Christmas, right? But if I go this way, I kind of push it away from that. So you're going to find that certain colors will have certain connotations, right? If I do black and orange, you're going to think probably Halloween or something, okay? A really handy thing that I personally use all the time is to use an image to find your color. So if I was going to put especially if like I'm going to use, let's say I'm doing a magazine ad, like on the last one, if I'm going to have an image, I would actually use color from the image in my background to find the colors for my text. So for instance, you can see this yellow comes from like the bright here. This kind of deep burgundy red comes from the clouds, and then this really dark black comes from the sea or the bay here. Okay, but these will naturally be cohesive because I'm using the same colors. Even if you don't want to do this, you can actually find color schemes just by using images. So even if I wasn't going to use this image, it will naturally be, because all these colors are interpollinating, that they're touching each other constantly, all the colors are bouncing off of each other, they're naturally harmonious. And so that will actually create a color scheme for me. So you can really use any picture. You can use clothing, right? You can use maybe you have a blouse that you think looks really nice and it's got some sort of pattern. You can just sample colors from that blouse, and then that could be your color scheme. So, utilize what's around you. Warms and cools. Obviously, if you have warms, those will ascend. Cools will descend. So if you're trying to make something come forward, you want to make sure those are warm. A really handy thing to do as well is to use accent. What that means is that you have one color that pops, like you just put on one element. This is a really common thing you'll see with interior design. So most of the time when you look at rooms, you're not going to make them really really strong. You're not going to make them really boisterous, right? You're not going to have like really bright greens and reds and all this other stuff because everything will clash. Most of the time, people want to live in a generally natural, neutral tone. You'll typically will see, tans and browns and, like pear yellow, apple greens and avocado. All the colors will all be these natural kind of colors that are usually kind of toned down, and that's fine, and that works well. But it might lose a little visual interest. So a lot of times, what you'll see, especially in interior design, they'll paint, they'll have the general design be that way, but then they'll have a bright red lamp, or they'll have a really bright turquoise chair. They'll put this one little touch of color that kind of adds interest to the entire piece. And you can do that with your designs as well. Try to limit the color numbers. Generally speaking, you want to make sure your stuff can work without color. The reason for that is that you never know how it's going to be reproduced. So if we were going to send something, if you've ever had shirts done before, they charge you by the number of colors in the shirt, because it's not like adding 2 colors is a little bit more work. It's literally twice as much work when you are doing screen printing. I used to do screen printing. It's twice as much work because you have to make twice as many screens. You have to apply it twice as many times. You have to cure it twice as many times. Everything you do has to be done that many more times. So a lot of times you want to make sure your designs don't require a huge spectrum of color. If you can make it so they work with very few colors, they'll actually be better off. Generally speaking, even if that wasn't a limitation, you generally want your designs, when you're doing like a page layout, you want to stay within the realm of 2 to 3 colors most of the time. That way you'll have interest because there's a little bit of variety, but it won't be too crazy where you have just all the colors of the rainbow. All right. Stationery design. So when we are creating stationery design, these are just some general rules that you might want to apply. Try to have repeating elements where possible. You want to have consistency. Your font size, use it. Make small font sizes. You don't need something super huge; it will look unbearable. You don't need to write phone, fax, yada yada yada. You can just write. I'll make this bigger a little bit. You could just write the number for phone number, right? I'm not going to think this is an email address. I will know that that's a phone number. And if I write, jcone@cecil.edu, I'm not going to go on my phone and start typing that out. I'm going to know that's an email address. And if I see 1 Seahawk Drive, I know that that's an address, right? You don't need to put in those other elements because the formatting themselves tells you what they are. It's a real common mistake that people often make is they will try to include those elements. When possible, don't use extra gobbledygook. So don't use bullets or anything like that. Try to use periods. And what I mean is that when you try to use those extra little characters, especially from a distance, they become muddied up, especially if you're using like any sort of interesting font. They'll be hard to read at those smaller bits, okay? Letterhead and envelope, these are just some more rules. Try to do something visually interesting. One of the things that we're going to be doing is some interactivity today. So if you click on this, you can see he runs and he stops. These are generally some interesting elements that you can include. We are going to create inside of InDesign. I'm going to have you make a interactive portfolio, okay? And so we're going to add some buttons, and you just want to make sure that that your buttons are buttonable, that they're obvious that they are buttons. That when you hover, they change, right? And then when you click on it, they also change, and then also they function, right? So this is what we call an event listener. And then the event handler is the thing that actually makes the function happen, right? So the listener is attached to this graphic, and then the function is actually making this play, all right? So that's basically what we're looking for. So we're going to make an interactive portfolio. The idea here is that by the end of this class, what you'll be able to do is you'll have a PDF that has buttons on it that you can click on, and when you click on the buttons, they can click on them and it'll go from each piece of your work. And then when you were done with this class, if you wanted to like apply to something or use this as a portfolio piece, you could send them this PDF and it'll have buttons embedded into it, and they can see all of your work, and it's interactive. It's kind of like having a website, but it'll be a PDF that anybody can open. All right. So I have video tutorials that's going to describe how to create a logo. So part of this assignment is you're going to do a project cover sheet. You're going to have to lay out your elements. You're going to have to use text, obviously, and there's going to be a logo design. So I want you to make a logo. So you can make whatever kind of logo you want. So generally speaking, hopefully you're a major in this class, but if you're photography, make up a mock photography company that you're going to do. If you're game, make a fake game company, or you could just use your name and be like, oh, this is my portfolio. If you're a marketing student, maybe you're going to come up with a company for that. But I want you to come up with some sort of logo. So I have kind of a rough illustration on how to create some computer graphics, some vector logo artwork inside. In this tutorial, then here, I show you how to make the interactive elements, and then finally you'll publish. This is going to be a lot like the last thing that we did. You don't actually have to put your artwork inside this. I just want you to have the layout of the PDF. So you just, all I'm going to need is that final interactive PDF. I don't need it to have all the other elements. It should have your logo embedded in it, and it should have functional buttons. But that's all I'm looking for. Okay. If you want to put your artwork in there, that's fine too. Make sure you also do the project or the discussion board as well. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck.